recording on. It's been a while since I've seen you. For those of you who are in the humanities class, of course, I saw you yesterday. All of you, every one of you I've seen. So I don't know where the others are, but they should come on soon. How are you?
I'm good.
Good. Are you still looking for a house, Jacoby?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, my mom and dad just signed last week on our house in Idaho. So now we're looking more.
yeah, now you've got the money.
Yeah.
That is awesome. Okay. Well, I can't believe how much the house prices keep going up.
You know, it's
So
crazy.
it is crazy. It's probably because of the law of supply and demand. Do you know what that law is? Do you know what it says?
I don't know what it says.
Basically, when there's less of something, there's more demand. So let's say you've got how many people in your family? 5?
Mm-hmm.
So if you had one cookie on a plate, how much of a demand would there be compared to having 50 cookies on a plate?
A lot more.
Everybody would be interested in getting a bite of that cookie, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if there was a plate of 50 of them, you'd pass by and go, oh, there's plenty, I don't need very much. So the value goes down. So when you look in Utah, there's very few houses that are for sale. And so that drives up the price. That means that there's more value, right?
Mm-hmm.
So crazy. And there's more demand because there's more people coming from other states to come into our state, which has more freedoms than other states. So anyway, hey, it's nice to see you, Elijah. And Dallin, are you here? I think you guys are here. Let's see, let me open up this page. Were you able to get some of your quotes? Oh, you did. That's awesome. Let's go for it. We've just got a few people. I don't know what happened with the rest of the people. They must be on vacation or something. But oh, we just missed Dallin. He's been having some internet problems. Okay, so how did you like The Last Battle? Was it the same or different? Was this the first time you've read it? First time for you, Jacoby? What about you, Elijah?
Yeah, this is the first time.
Okay, so you guys aren't Narnia fans. No problem, you don't have to be. C.S. Lewis was prolific in writing, but very few children's stories. And this was, I think, his only attempt to write for children. And there's tons of symbolic meaning in his books. But so Dallin, we were just asking how many times people have read this book. Have you read it before? No. Okay, first time. So I've probably read it, oh, I don't know how many times. I read it with all my kids. Probably read it about 5 times through the course. I've been raising kids for 30 years now. So my oldest is 30, but I probably didn't start reading to her until she was about 7. So it's been about 23 years I've been reading this book to my kids. And I've never, ever really read it since I have read about the drama triangle. So it was really, really fun to read it this time and really just pick it apart. What were your thoughts as you read it? What were some of the things that you noticed?
In the beginning of the book, there's a lot of the ape guilt tripping, the donkey puzzle, just using that to manipulate him.
Yeah, a lot of manipulation. Excellent, yeah. And I wonder, would we have noticed this had we not really studied manipulation and the drama triangle? I don't know. I don't know. I read it so many times and I never noticed that. Or I did notice it, but I didn't have a word to put to it. Interesting. What are some of your other thoughts? Jacoby or
I've
like,
only ever read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And you know,
you're
both
cutting
of
out.
these books.
You're
Sorry.
cutting out. Let's try again. I can hear you now.
Okay. Well, I was just saying that I've only ever, like, from C.S. Lewis, the only other book I've ever read was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
I
That
can
was
only,
another really.
I don't know what's happening, but I can hear. I've only read books by C.S. Lewis, and then it just kind of goes. I wonder if you need to get closer to your computer or something. I don't know. I want to hear you though. Does anybody else hear him fine, or can you hear him, Jacoby? Oh, he's going to cut out, or he's going to. Yeah. Okay. So I wasn't the only one. That makes me feel better. Thanks. I was thinking, I heard a few words, but then it came out. So Jacoby, what about you? What was some of your impressions?
Yeah, honestly, I really liked the book, but the monkey, the ape, drove me a little crazy,
Yeah.
especially at the beginning.
Yeah.
So
He needed a shift in
Mhm.
his thinking. Yeah. Elijah, let's try this again. Oh, now I can't hear you at all, even though you're unmuted. That is so weird. Are you on a new computer? Oh, yeah. Try again.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Does this work better?
Yeah.
Already. I'm sorry about that. I was just saying that, like, the only other book I've ever read from C.S. Lewis was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and that was another really, like, you know, full of Christian imagery and kind of all that same story.
Yeah.
And so this one had that same pattern, but it was a lot more, I felt like, lofty, and it's, or not lofty, but ambitious, I guess, in its attempt to create this really grand Christian narrative, which I appreciated. It had high aspirations, but, like, dang, it went big.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. Yeah.
He wants us to think of the afterlife in that one, doesn't he? Has anybody ever read The Great Divorce? That's C.S. Lewis. I'm reading that for another class that I'm taking actually. And it's his afterlife is very similar to the one in the battle, in the last battle. But yeah, very ambitious. He's got all these people that have died in a train wreck and they come to Narnia to save Narnia, but then they go up to this beautiful place that is all of Aslan's land. It's beautiful.
Another thing that I thought was kind of interesting about the book was, like, it's called The Last Battle, but there's really not as much, like, full battles in this one as, at least in the other books I've read from him. But that kind of stuck out to me because I was like, oh, this is interesting because it's called The Last Battle. So you expect some kind of grand, you know, two forces fighting against each other. And we do kind of get that, but it's a lot more subtle in the way that this kind of demise of Narnia kind of occurs, which is, I thought was interesting.
Yeah, and I want to get to what that battle is today. That's kind of what I want to end on. I don't think I want to start it now, but I want to end on that because you're right. Has anybody seen the Narnia films by any chance? By raise of hands? More or less, Elijah, you have? More or less, Jacoby? What about you, Dallin? Have you seen them? Yeah. So the Last Battle movie is far different. Have you seen that one? I watched the first part, but then I got bored. Okay. So the first part of The Last Battle?
No, like a long time ago, I watched one of them. I don't remember, but I was bored as a child. I was like, this is stupid, so I just didn't finish it. But
No,
yeah.
there is a BBC production, I think, that's pretty boring. Maybe that's the one you were looking at, or were you looking at the newer ones, the newest ones that were put out?
I don't think it was a newer one. It was a bit ago.
Yeah, I think you were probably watching I don't know who produced it, but somewhere in England, and I don't remember who the producer is. I thought it was BBC, but yeah, pretty boring. But the newer ones are pretty fascinating. They teach a lot of principles, like what we've been trying to learn. Okay. So let's go into the quotes that you brought in to class. And then I want to reserve the last little while to talk about the kind of battle that he's talking about in this book. So who wants to go first? Looks like I must have Dallin at the very top and then Jacoby and Elijah, but let's choose which of you want to go first with yours. Go ahead, Jacoby.
Okay, so my quote's on the back of the book,
Okay.
and I really thought it was really interesting. It says, King Tran knows that children from another world always come to Narnia when things are at their worst. And so my question is, does God send angels to us when we are going through hard times? I read this the other day and like, oh my goodness, like that's kind of like a principle I got out of it. And I thought it was really cool.
Yeah. Where is that? Is it then that first one? That first chapter? Because I remember seeing that. Oh, first chapter is shift. Never mind. I just wanted to go to the page where it is in the book too, because I remember seeing that as I was reading it. Sorry. Does anybody know where it is?
Are you talking about the part when like he appears to the kids?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Or when the kids appear to him all of a sudden. There's the cat, Ginger.
I think it's on like page 51 and 52.
Oh yeah, I just found chapter 4. That's where he's tied up to the tree. 50. So you're saying 54?
51 and 52, I think.
51 and 52.
On exactly chapter 5, the kids actually show up. But his misery did not last long. Almost at once, there's a bump and then a second bump, and 2 children were standing before him.
Yes. And then he must have said that before. Your quote is, King Tyrion knows that children from another world always come to Narnia when things are at their worst. Okay, so he probably didn't say that exactly, but he does say it somewhere. And I can't remember where it is, but it's probably somewhere in there. Thank you, Dallin. You're awesome. So you're asking, does God, like this, does God send angels to us when we are going through hard times? What do you guys think?
I personally think he does, because about a year ago, just over a year ago, my dad started I don't remember what it's called, but it's some kind of brain mapping. I've talked to you guys about it before. And
Yeah.
before that, the year before that, my dad struggled really hard. It was really hard for him. And there's just been experiences that we've had as a family that like we feel like great grandparents or like someone near us at the time. And like it's just really cool thinking that they're there for us whenever we need them.
Yes.
Just like they're here for us whenever we need them when they're living also.
Yes. And I'm just looking for a scripture. Does anybody know of a scripture that comes to mind? I'm just remembering one, but it's not showing up in this index. it talks about mine angels round about you to bear you up. Where is that? I guess I'll look. Does anybody know where that is? Doctrine and Covenants 84. 84. 84. Let's see what verse. There it is. So it is. I'm going to put it in. It's 8488. I'm going to put it in the chat box. It's going to have those little letters in it, you know, that are for the references, but you can live with it. So, and whoso receiveth you, there I will be also, for I will go before your face. I will be on your right hand and on your left, and my spirit shall be in your hearts, and mine angels round about you to bear you up. There it is. And C.S. Lewis talks about that in his experience with, you've read Surprised by Joy, his biography. He talks about angels, I think, that he felt like he was guided. And he felt like he was guided because he loved mythology. He loved the stories of mythology. And he felt like, why do all these civilizations, even the story of Gilgamesh, which is the earliest literary book ever written, all of them believe in higher powers? Why don't I? Anyway, what do you guys think? Do you think angels attend us?
I think so, but I also think that there's an element where like God kind of trusts us to do the first part. Like even when like what was his name? Talisman? I forgot his name. But even whenever he does kind of call some help, I guess, or some divine assistance when he's tied to the tree, he's already gone through some stuff. Tyrion, that's what it was. He's already kind of gone through some struggle, and he's already tried to do things himself. And I think that that's pretty true. I think that, you know, we have to not only depend on some kind of divine help. I think that God trusts us enough that he allows us to, you know, do our best. And then I think though that he does help us in our
Yeah.
struggle.
I was just studying Galatians yesterday for my college class, my class is called the Judeo-Christian Foundations, and we're reading a bunch of books, even this, The Great Divorce, but we're also supposed to be reading some of the New Testament. And I was reading Galatians, and Paul was saying, he was talking about how he was talking to these Jewish people who had been baptized Christian when John the Baptist was on the earth and when Christ was on the earth. And of course, Paul never knew Christ. He was born after, he came into the scene after Christ had been dead. But anyway, he is saying, look at what you've done. You've gone back from this faith-filled Christianity, and you're going back to all these laws and rules and the Mosaic law. And you're depending on all these laws to tell you exactly what you need to be doing every minute of the day. Basically, you know, that's kind of hyperbole, but he says, what you need to do is you need to get rid of, don't depend on the law. The law to tell you what to do is not going to get you where you need to go. You need to have faith, and you need to put forth your effort first. And that's faith. Putting forth effort into something means that you have faith, that you know that this is what you need to do. And then, like you said, Elijah, that this trust is put on us, like, okay, they have faith in me, I'm going to help them. Yes, we have to have that faith first. and we can't depend on other things to pull us through, like laws. The laws are there, other laws are there. We don't live the Mosaic law, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. We don't. Well, some of us do, maybe. Maybe when we were young and our older sibling or younger sibling took something from us, we beat them up. Okay, yeah. So what have we discovered then? That you need faith first, and then he sends angels, right? Yeah. I want to tell you an experience. I don't have a lot of experiences like this one, but this one was the only one that I had like this. It was 2008. I was just starting George Wythe University. I guess it was called George Wythe College back then. I started studying the great books under great mentors. And we happened to be studying that year, we were studying economy. And one of the books we had to read was the Manifesto to the Communist Party by Karl Marx. And I had not known, I was such a, I don't know, shallow person, I guess, because I had never really learned about things like this. And so to be put right in front of this book that's telling me that I need to give up all my property, that we need to get rid of families, that we need to get rid of marriage, that we need to put women in common so men can have them all, that we can, that children should be raised by the state. All of these things that I'm reading, and basically it was overwhelming to me. I was raising my children. I believed in marriage. I believed in God. All of these things I believed in that he was taking away. And then I was learning that 70% of the whole world believe in these principles of getting rid of property and getting rid of marriage and families. And I thought, oh my gosh, what's my role in this? And I just felt this intrinsic agony, I guess you can say, wondering what was going to go on. And I remember I was sitting in front of my computer. I had my paper I was ready to write a paper on it. But I kind of, I'll be vulnerable. I kind of started to cry because I didn't know what to do with this because it was so huge. It was so huge. This was way back before we even went through all that we've gone through the last 4 years with a shift in much more postmodernism. We didn't have a lot of postmodernism back when I was studying. So anyway, it was huge. And I just thought, oh, this is awful. And I remember crying and putting my head down on my book and just crying. And my grandfather, Grandpa Rex, Dallin, this is Grandma Mary's dad. He had just passed away 2 months prior, and he was one of my best friends. And he was very politically involved and knew a lot politically. He was a good friend of mine, and he taught me many, many things. But he had just passed away, and but as I was crying, his voice talked to me, and it said, "Julie, look at your computer. There's the answer." And I looked all around. I thought, that's Grandpa Rex's voice. And I looked at my computer, and there it was. Karl Marx is what I had put down. And I said, that's not the answer. What do you mean? And he says, no, it's the marks. And he's always funny. He said, it's the marks of the beast. And I had to laugh because, and I just, tears were coming out of my eyes, but I was laughing because I was realizing, oh, it's this last battle that's going to happen on the earth. It's that last battle, this where Satan has dominion over most of the people on the earth. It's this postmodern era that's going to be coming. And that was all. But I knew that he had come to me to help me recognize this is coming. This is the last battle. And the marks of the beast, I'm going to write it down here, is 666. And in Hebrew, the number 7, I'm going to put down here, the number 7 means perfection in politics. Okay. So 7 means perfection in politics, in working with people. Okay. Working, whoops. So that's the meaning, Hebrew meaning. I learned this a little later than then. So 666 is almost 7. Well, each of the 6s are almost 7, right? So Satan makes everything look almost right. It looks so right to everyone that we fall for this postmodernism, this doing away with objective truth, doing away with marriage, doing away, because he's making it look like this is more desirable. We don't have to have perfection in politics. We can have almost. And that's the mark. So that is the last battle that we are going to be fighting, and that is the philosophies of men as opposed to Christ. So we can choose man or Christ. That's the last battle. And what's hard is that the philosophies out there look good. They look desirable for many. I don't know why I brought that up when I was going to bring that up at the end, but I wasn't even going to tell you that story. But when you talked about angels, I know that angels are here to help us understand some things. They come in many different ways, but we'll talk about this battle later. But I wanted you to kind of maybe think about this for a little bit. Okay, let's go. This is a slightly different question, but it's been annoying me for a bit. How do you know you're not living Mosaic laws? How do you know when you're shaved down, when you've shaved down truths to their core? Who's to say modern church practices aren't comparable to Mosaic laws? Hey, Elijah, we did live before you started in this earth. That was the focus of the church, was a lot of do's and don'ts and applications. I'm going to put that down. So applications are ways to live a principle. And so the Mosaic laws are applications. Okay. The whole Mosaic law was supposed to point the Jews to Christ. Obviously it didn't, but it was a bunch of applications. Here's what you need to do in this situation. Here's what you need to do in this situation. When I went to church, our Sunday school classes were about, here's what you're supposed to do on Sundays, and here's what you're not supposed to do on Sundays. So I think the way you can recognize that is if you live by principles, then you can apply them how it works for you. Does that make sense? Does that answer?
Yeah. Well, yeah, but I guess the next question that kind of came to me after that is like, how do you find that balance between this like application teaching and like you were talking about earlier with this like kind of postmodern, where like, well, if it works for me, then it's truth. Because I don't know, it just seems like to me it's really easy to go on like or connect, I guess, living by principles as living how you want, I guess, because if every principle is centered around your perception of that principle and how that principle relates to you, then doesn't it become flexible to a point where, I mean, it's almost so relative that it's really easy to get into that postmodern mindset?
I see where you're going. Yes, if you don't have a standard. So so the first principles are a set standard that never change. They're already shaved down to their most naked truth. Can I say that? So what are some first principles? Spooner, Lysander Spooner talks about them in the 1700s. Blackstone's talks about them in When Did Blackstone Live? He was a great lawyer in England. 1700s? I don't know when Blackstone lived, but he talks about first principles. Our four basic rights are first principles: the right to life, liberty. What are the other ones? Does anybody know?
Property and conscience.
Yeah. Okay. So you can't go back to any further. Think of Viktor Frankl with conscience. How do you spell that? Is it with an S? Conscience with an E? With a C? Nope. Oh, conscience. That's right. Conscience. Okay. So remember, did we read this book in this class? Oh, okay. We read it with the adults. Does anybody know the story of Viktor Frankl? Elijah, do you want to tell us in a couple sentences?
I think he was like some kind of like psychiatrist or something, but I think basically he's just like a Holocaust survivor, and he wrote a bunch of books from those experiences. And he talks a lot about like existentialism and meaning, and I guess principles as well.
Mm-hmm. So his basic premise is, and it's called Man's Search for Meaning. He every single one of his freedoms was taken away. His life, not his life, but his liberty. I shouldn't say everyone. So all of his liberty to do anything he needed to do for his own life was taken away. All of his properties taken away. Yeah, he is the founder of logotherapy. But what got him to that, and this is super important, Elijah, is that when he realized that all things were taken from him, his family, his property, his life, his living, not his life, his liberty, then he realized he had one right left that no one can take away from you. Do you know what that is? What's the one thing no one can take from you? Your conscience. And that he could actually find meaning in his horrible life on a concentration camp. He could find meaning. He could create. He could be a creator in his life every day. Okay. So where am I going with this? You had another question. I was going to go. What was your question?
Just like how to find the balance between Mosaic laws and like postmodernism.
Oh, that's
you were
right.
talking about the structure about Unbreakable.
Yes. Okay. And so then I was talking about first principles. If everything points to first principles, okay, there's also these principles that we know, and that is they're the 9 basic doctrines of the gospel. Okay. Not the whole world knows them. And that's why we're sending missionaries out. But what are some of those doctrines? And these are first principles. God is our Father, right? The Godhead. Jesus Christ atoned for the sins of man. Obedience is a doctrine, obedience to God. The plan of salvation is a doctrine. So if people know them and they compare all the principles toward all of these life, liberty, property, conscience, and the 9 basic doctrines of the gospel that Christ instituted in the earth 2,000 years ago, and they've been restored, then every principle can be lived differently, 8 billion ways. That's how many people live on this earth, but they're all living the principle. Okay. But if you feel that marriage is another one of the basic doctrines of the gospel, if you feel that that's not a principle, then you're going to go away from that and you're going to be breaking that principle. And you're going to say, but it feels right and it's right for me. So that's where I'm going to go with this. But all that is the same thing that we talked about. You know, where does evil come from? It just means we're not living the principles. It means that we're choosing to disobey God. So yes, the postmodernism comes from breaking principles. Does that make sense? So postmodern.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
like my main concern is just like there's not really like a judge that you can turn to for like who breaks those principles. So like, you know, from an outside perspective, like let's say someone wants to break that principle of the marriage between man and woman. Like how can there be like an outside judge on the earth if they're still an imperfect being? Like who's to say that they're not breaking that principle, right? And so
Right.
like can they get a little bit relative? Because if
Totally.
you can't really judge someone else's application of a principle, how can you make some kind of objective standard such as a principle?
So the only objective standard that you can have is God and natural law. That's the only thing. And when you don't believe in natural law, this is a good book you need to read. I'm going to go grab it. Have you ever heard of Jay Budziszewski? Jay Budziszewski. He wrote this book. You would love this book. It's called What We Can't Not Know. And he's a professor at, he lives in Texas. I think he's a professor at the University in Austin. Fun name, yeah. Jay Budziszewski. The only way I know how to say his name is because he's on a lot of podcasts. People interview him. He's a professor. Let's see, where is he? Professor. Is a professor of government and philosophy at the University of Texas at Austin. Among his several books are The Revenge of Conscience, Politics and the Fall of Man, and The Line Through the Heart, Natural Law is as Fact, Theory, and Sign of Contradiction. So he is a fascinating read. And he will say that people have gone away from natural law. They don't want to have anything that anchors them in place. So if you go away from that anchor, of course you can believe in anything you want. It's okay. That's fine. And Lehi's Dream talks a lot about those people because they want, rather than they staying on that straight and narrow path that leads to the greatest happiness, they want to go all over the place, just like the worms. Yesterday I went on my walk. We had a day of rain and then a day of dry, and as I'm going on my walk, there's like billions of worms everywhere, and I think, why can't they just stay in the grass where they know that? Well, they don't know, but they're going to stay alive, but no, they want to wander, they want to go off, and it's eventually it destroys them because they're away from their element. So he talks about how, yeah, people go away from that anchor of natural law and they feel good about it because it just feels free. It's just like those worms. Oh, I'm free and get away from this grass. Another book. I don't know exactly where it is, but it's Leo Tolstoy. It's Anna Karenina. Have you ever heard of that? Karenina, whatever. So the first line, does anybody know what the first line says in that book? I can remember. All happy families are alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. And he's talking about natural law as well. He says there are certain principles that you follow that are anchored on a solid foundation. And when you go away from that anchor because you want freedom from having to be anchored, then there are a billion ways that you can break those principles. And that's what that's talking about. So yeah, postmodernism is where you don't have any absolute truths. That's what it means. There are no absolute truths. You can do whatever you want. There's no anchor. So yeah. But it also means basically you're breaking principles. And this may be why a lot more people now are damaging property more and more, because there is no law that keeps us from damaging somebody else's property. I don't know. Good question. I think you should get this book. I really do. It's not a super easy read, but it is. It's just that you can understand all the words he says, but as you go in, you have to stop and study and think and ponder and then go on. You can't just like blast through it, but it's a fascinating book. All right. Where are we? Who were we on? We've only talked about Jacobi's. I love going in little rabbit holes. Okay. Dallin, do you want to take us to yours? I know you've probably got your camera off because you've got bad internet lately, right?
Actually, it had completely cut out yesterday. Right now, it's not bad, but windows are right behind me, so you would be able to see very well.
Okay.
Because I have to watch my dogs. But this was just a quote from the beginning, and one of the examples of the ape manipulating the puzzle. Very well, I will go in. I'm feeling cold enough already in this cruel wind, but I'll go in. I shall probably die. Then you'll be sorry. And Shift's voice sounded as if he was just going to burst into tears. Please don't, please don't, please don't, said Puzzle, half braying and half talking. I never meant anything of the sort, Shift. Really, I didn't. You know how stupid I am and how I can't think of more than one thing at a time. And the Shift is just constantly reminding Puzzle that Shift is more clever than he, and that he's not smart and he can't think for himself.
Yeah. And making him feel like putting all the responsibility on Puzzle to do everything for him. Yeah. How do we manipulate? Do we ever manipulate? I mean, I've never done it. I've seen myself do it so often as a mom. What are some of the things we do to manipulate others?
I mean, I don't even know if manipulation is as bad as it gets. Like, I know it has a really negative connotation, but like, even just discussions about ideas is a form of manipulation. It's just kind of trying to change someone else's mind, right? So I think that I mean, you have to be more precise, I guess, with
Okay, so
the
there's got to be a
behind
motive
the
behind it.
manipulation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I'm talking about this kind of manipulation where you're trying to get someone else to do your work for you, and you're putting the responsibility that you have for yourself and you're putting that on someone else. That's what I'm talking about.
I don't know if this was just me, but you like completely cut out. Can you repeat that?
Oh, yes. And it just told me that my internet's unstable. I'm going to hook to my phone really quickly. It's not showing up. Oh, there it is. Hold on.
But as long as he's thinking he's not clever or that Shift is better than him and he's lucky to have Shift as a friend, he's going to stay in that situation to where he's being manipulated by Shift.
Yeah. So
What's most interesting, I guess. Oh, go ahead.
oh no, I was just going to repeat kind of what I was saying. You're right that there are several different ways to manipulate. When I play chess with my children, I'm manipulating the pieces, I'm moving them, right? So what I was meaning was I was focusing on this kind of manipulation, that the motive behind it is to take away my own responsibility and give it up and blame and expect somebody else to do my dirty work. That's what I'm talking about. Go ahead, Elijah.
I was just going to kind of repeat what John was saying about like what kind of enabled this downfall, or the catalyst for this demise of Narnia kind of centers around Puzzle's just naivety, and that like he can't depend on himself and his own trust and his own capabilities, and so he has to depend on someone else. And because he has to depend on someone else, and because he's naive, he's depending on someone else who is, manipulating him for something, I guess, more malicious. And so it's just reminded me, I guess, of the drama triangle, and that like if we can't trust in our own capabilities, then like we're kind of being more vulnerable, I guess, than is a good amount of vulnerability, I guess. We're kind of allowing ourselves to become more easily captive because we are in this state of dependence rather than, I guess, proactive.
Yeah. You have a tendency to mute yourself right before you say the last word, just so you know. But I think I understood what you're saying. Yes. So what are some examples that we can find of this kind of manipulation going on in our world today? So I'm reading billions of books, I think. So I'm reading this book, which I don't recommend to any of you because it's full of bad words. But this Gad Saad is a professor where is he a professor? Professor of marketing at the John Molson School of Business in Concordia University, where he held the research chair in evolutionary behavioral sciences and Darwinism consumption from 2008 to 2018. He is a Jew that doesn't believe in God. He lived through what is that country called? It was a
Lebanon.
Lebanese.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He had to kind of
So
get out of there.
You know him.
Yeah, I read that one the other day. Yeah.
Yes, love this book. So he talks about a lot of manipulation that's going on through parasitic, well, he calls them pathogens, idea pathogens, doesn't he? And that they're going through all of the universities right now, and they're destroying, actually, that maybe the ideas start out nobly, but they actually are destroying the whole makeup of our society, our culture, these idea pathogens. And so these people that believe in these ideas are manipulating everyone else to make sure that you believe them. For instance, the cancel culture. If I don't believe a certain thing, then I am the enemy. So it's not allowing me to have this freedom of conscience. So we are actually losing freedom of speech, freedom of liberty, the right to life, right to liberty, the right to our conscience. That's what's happening right now. So we are do any of you feel, maybe you're not old enough to feel manipulated by the society today? Have any of you had that experience or feeling? Maybe not.
Not specifically to me, but like just in general, I feel like there's a lot of stuff, just for example, in the news that shows the way that they want you to think, trying to manipulate you.
Yes. And if you don't think that way, you're pretty much an outsider. Whereas I grew up in a world where there was a lot of freedom of speech. We were able to, like people could put down the church. Oh, here's something interesting that God says to Gadsod. I don't know how you say his name. He does some interviews with Jordan Peterson, and he was talking about how, my mind is just losing. I had this thought I was going to share. Oh, I can't remember what I was going to say. Maybe it'll come back. What was the last thing you said, Dallin?
Just that,
people telling you how to think.
yeah.
The news.
One of our neighbors says that if you don't watch the news, you're uninformed. And if you do watch the news, you're misinformed.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. And I still can't remember what he was going to say, but he did say something that went along with that's what's happening. Oh, darn it. Must be scatterbrained right now, because I wasn't planning on bringing that book in, but it's been such a eye opener that this is our last battle on earth right now, that these ideas of these idea pathogens is what they're calling them, that is not allowing us to have this freedom of speech, to be able to talk and discuss ideas. We can do this in our class, but yes, he is an evolutionary psychologist. You must have written that a while ago, though. Sorry. Okay. So have we picked this apart, Dallin? Or is there something else we want to talk about?
Not specifically. That was just one of the examples that stood out to me of that.
Yeah. What do you think his name symbolizes? Shift. Symbolization can mean anything, by the way. I mean, symbols can mean so many things to everybody. So it's not like there's a right or wrong answer. But what do you think of when you see the name shift?
Untrustworthy, like shifty.
Ah, yeah, that's good. What do you think, Jacoby or Elijah?
When I think of shift, I think of like change. Like he kind of changed the minds of those people.
Yeah. And a redirection. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. He's taken a different direction. That's for sure. Cool. Okay. Let's go to Elijah's.
This is kind of actually really well related to what we were just talking about with shift and puzzle, but I don't really remember exactly where in the book. But this was after the dwarves and a lot of the other, I guess, populations of Narnia had kind of been tricked by shift. And Tyrion was trying to, I guess, convince them to join his side or whatever. And what stuck out the most to me in this passage is the last line: "The dwarves are for the dwarves." And it's an interesting parallel, I guess. The dwarves have with puzzle, and that they're both kind of, I don't know, there's a lot of, like we were talking about, manipulation, and mistrust. And it's interesting the position that the dwarfs took for me, because I mean, ultimately the book disagrees with them, but from like a strategical standpoint, it makes sense that, like, you know, you can't really trust many people in this universe because there's so many that kind of are trying to misguide you. And so this kind of made a pair, I guess I thought of as a paradox. And the question was kind of just like, how do you trust, I guess? Like, how do you approach that from just a standpoint of trying to find truth? Because, you know, like we've been talking about, there's a lot of just, you know, last conversation, there's a lot of people, you know, let's argue to say almost everyone wants, you know, you to think a certain way, which is normal, but that doesn't like mathematically, everyone can't be right, right? So how do you approach that problem? How do you approach the problem of having to find a truth, and sort out all these mistruths, I guess?
Yeah. I did like looking at how the dwarfs were just sick and tired of being led by someone else saying what they should do, and they realized this is not for me. Yeah. That was interesting. How do we find truth? I wrote a bunch of these questions right at the beginning. I said, authority figures, how do you respond to different authorities? What is the truth? Who knows the truth? What price does one pay to know the truth? What responsibilities do you have once you know the truth? Like, where do we find the truth? What do you think? I'm going to look at something from Lysander Spooner. I can't remember where I have it. Hold on. Has anybody ever read anything from Lysander Spooner? There's Blackstone. Cicero talks about natural law. Here's Cicero. He says, since that is law, we should also consider human beings to be united with God's by law. Furthermore, among those who have a sharing in law, there is a sharing in right. And for them, these things are, and then there's missing text because we don't have everything from Cicero. And they must be recognized as being of the same city. If they obey the same commanders and men in power, even much more so. Moreover, they obey this celestial system, the divine mind and very powerful God, so that now this whole universe should be thought to be one city in common between gods and human beings. And he goes on and and then he talks about how we're God's children. This is Cicero, and he, you know, we read in Humanities, we read Julius Caesar. Cicero is part of that whole group there. And he says that we are born for justice and that right is established by nature, and nature is God or natural law. So then we've got Lysander Spooner. He says, even, where does it say, even children know first laws? Somewhere. Sorry, I wasn't prepared to use all of these, but there's so many. Lysander Spooner, I believe, no, he was not part of the Scottish Enlightenment, but people of the Scottish Enlightenment, this is what our founders really, really hung on to, the Scottish Enlightenment writers, were that natural law is the anchor, the base, so that we know where truth comes from. I'm not going to go through Lysander Spooner because I don't have it marked where I would need to go to really fast, but there are so many philosophers that understand first principles, that that's where you go to find the truth. And so many of them recognize that there is a God, and he's the one that teaches those first principles. But then Lysander Spooner says children even know some of those first principles. They know because they're playing with their toy and someone else takes it out of their hand and they know that's mine. Lysander Spooner says God writes on the very heart of man those first principles. So we know them. I don't know, Elijah. I mean, it's so easy for me because I've been raised with a just God, a God that doesn't condemn, but that gives blessings every time we live a law. And then if we don't live a law, we just don't have that blessing. But the rest of the world feels like God is a condemning God. He's not. We just condemn ourselves by not living up to our privileges. So that's the thing is we got to go look into some of the rational writers that didn't believe in God and find out where they find truth. You are a big reader. You read a lot. What have they said? I don't know who they are, but
I mean, when you're talking about, rational writers who are trying to live without God, there's a lot of like a lot of the like existentialist movement writers did something like that. I know Dostoevsky and Nietzsche kind of tried to tackle this problem, and they came up with different answers. Dostoevsky's kind of like the Christian, while Nietzsche takes the other side. And I think yeah, and I think Nietzsche, I really, Nietzsche's a lot to consume. I don't think I'm up to the task at the moment, but I'm trying to understand him more. And, he kind of poses meaning as this grand challenge, as in like, okay, God's dead. Let's rise to this challenge of trying to find meaning for ourselves. And
rise
that's
above the herd.
exactly. And so I really don't know how to answer that question either, which is why I asked it. But yeah, it's a difficult one.
It is a difficult one for the rest of the world. But for those who have a basis, an anchor in natural law, it's easy for them to come to truth. But then again, my mother was raised in the church. She's a beautiful woman, but she's very simple-minded and she just believes. Whereas it's good to just believe, but it's also good to use your reasoning powers and really understand why. So I think that's why this question is super important and should be an important question throughout the entire course of your life. So, okay, so what is the major battle? We've talked a little bit about it, but what is the major battle? It's probably not so much physical, but what is the major battle that they're dealing with? It might have something to do with what you just talked about. I don't know. Is this the major battle? Do you think? Or could it be something different? Jacoby, you were nodding your head. You think that probably is the last battle of what is truth?
I think that's part of it, because a lot of the time, like the dwarves and like the beasts and stuff, they believed that Aslan was in there, and they just went off of what people said and they thought it was true.
Yeah. What do you think, Dallin? I may be wrong, so you guys can disagree with me if you want. But I think it is the battle of what truth is. And that everyone seems to have their own truth. Oh, okay. Nietzsche, why don't you just read it to us?
Sure. I've just been trying to summarize because I am not very good at articulating things I don't understand. But if I can write it down and look at it, it's a lot easier. So I just wrote that Nietzsche saw traditional moral values rapidly decaying within belief systems, and held that they must be kind of replaced with personal value systems that you have to craft yourself. One of his more popular ideas is this idea of circular time, and it's similar to reincarnation, and just that like one should live their life as if they had to be lived it the same way endlessly, and so that there's not, I guess, mistakes made, or at least an attempt to avoid mistakes. And I think that idea he used tried to kind of replace with God, and that like it's hard to be moral without some kind of force, without a force kind of telling you or to be moral. And so he used this idea of circular time to try to, I guess, replace this notion of you should be moral for another life, and rather you should be moral for this life that kind of is always the same, I guess. So he talks a lot about how like one of the greatest Christian nightmares, I guess, is like this idea of reincarnation, because he thinks that like Christians live for the next life too much. And so this is where he gets this idea of circular time. But it's interesting. I don't know. It's a lot to, I guess, think through.
And you know, he probably sounded really noble at the beginning, but the question is, his ideas have now taken over. And what is the result? That's what you get a look at, is what is the result? What happened in the wars that happened? Did he write this at the last of the 1800s? So we look at the war that happened 20 years later or 14 years later, or the war that happened all through Africa, or the war that happened in World War II. And we look at the result of this. 1886. Okay. Yeah. I think he died like right after the turn of the century, I think. And then his sister was the one that published everything, I believe. I don't know if he published a lot, but his sister was the one that published most of his stuff.
I know he was like really sick throughout all of his like authorship. So what he would do is he would just like think about like words or sentences, and write like a week at a time. He would write very slowly just because I think he was partially blind as well. But yeah, rough.
Yeah, he had a lot of health problems. So yeah, and since the other students haven't really talked or discussed Nietzsche, it's kind of hard to have a really great, fair discussion on it. But truly, his ideas have had a result in where we are now. So it's basically, we have to decide, what are the results of these ideas that come around, and what are the results when we adhere to the principles of natural law, and choose for ourselves, where do we want to go with this? And it's extremely important that we are aware of Nietzsche, and that we are aware of another existentialist is Soren Kierkegaard, who was also more of a Christian based. But it's really important that we're aware of all of these ideas, like Shift had, like all of these things are important. We shouldn't not study them, but we should recognize that truth is always going to be truth, and that there is objective truth instead of only subjective truth. What does it mean, objective truth? Jacoby, do you know objective and subjective truth? So that's why we need to talk about this. Is objective truth just means that everyone sees it, it's a truth. Okay, I shouldn't say everyone, but that it's always going to be a truth. And subjective means me. It's like my personal truths or my personal perceptions, my personal beliefs. Those are all subjective. I can't say that they are completely a truth to you. Here's one. For me, a subjective truth is I have to stay away from sugar. Now that's a negative principle for me, but I'm an alcoholic when it comes to sugar. I just can't, I don't even want to touch it. And I haven't touched it for almost 7 years, and I'm great. I'm fine. I have sweets with fruit, and that's great. But I can't put that on you, Jacoby, or you, Elijah, or you, Dallin. That's not a truth for you, right? So that's a subjective truth. And postmodernism is full of subjective truths and no objective truth. Means they don't see anything as a truth. Okay, we need to go, but really quickly, can you all tell me what biography you are reading?
I'm reading The Hiding Place.
The Hiding Place. That's right. You've told me that before. Dallin, what are you reading? Elijah, what are you reading? Both of you leave.
No, sorry. I'm doing Joan of Arc.
Joan of Arc. Good. Okay. So, and Dallin, you're not sure yet, but okay. So we're reading this for humanities next week. This might be a good one to read for this class as well. This is a girl who knows what she saw, knows that she did see an angel. By the way, that goes along with your first question, Jacoby. And she is interrogated by the church, who will not believe what she saw. So here's another question. What is truth? So if you read this book, you're going to get to discover a little bit more about that question that we're talking about. All right, we will see you next week with a presentation on your biography. For this class, if you are reading Joan of Arc and you're in humanities, which all of you are, you're only required to read the first half of Joan of Arc. I'm okay with you doing just that first half and making a presentation on what you learned in that first half. So anyway, just so you know. All righty. Any questions? You're awesome. This was a great discussion. I didn't know it was going to be so awesome without so many people. Thank you so much. Good luck in finding the truth, everybody.